You are tuned into the Dr. Tina Show with Dr. Tina Moore. For more, visit drtyna.com. Jonathan Jarecki, welcome to the Dr. Tina Show. I'm so excited to have you on today.
Thank you so much. This is exciting. I'm excited for it.
Yeah. So I found you randomly on Instagram, and I was so excited because I was like, who is this young man? I turned around to my husband. I'm like, look at this young man. Look at what he's posting. Like, you're saying all the things that I've been trying to say for years, and just really excited to dive into it. All things light, sunlight, UV light, LED light. Like, we're going to talk about all of it. So let the audience know your background's pretty interesting. Are you working on your PhD right now? Do I have that right?
So I'm an undergraduate right now in college. So I'm on the PhD track. So what I want to do after I graduate undergrad is planning to do my PhD afterwards. But yeah, right now I'm an undergrad student. I'm going into my junior year of college at Davidson College in North Carolina. And I'm studying biology and minoring in neuroscience on the PhD track. And yeah, sort of like how I got here is really, I was raised in a very holistic alternative medicine household. My mom, I say this all the time, but our infrared sauna, which we still have, it's in our garage, is older than me. I'm 20 years old. The thing is like, I think 35. So my mom has had it for a while. And we've been on this very, alternative health track from day one. My mom she met this man named John Galamaga, who's been in the health and wellness space for over 40 years. And he radically transformed my dad's life. My dad lost 60 pounds, completely changing his lifestyle, got completely off of Dilantin, which is epilepsy medication, without any seizures. And then my grandma as well, this man, John, dramatically transformed my grandma's life, who had congenital heart failure, gave her 9 more years to live. And my mom saw that and was like, all right, I'm just going to listen to whatever John has to say and roll with it for my kids. And so she raised I have 3 older siblings, including myself. She raised all 4 of her children on this holistic, lifestyle. And, growing up, we, our big focus was on diet and lifestyle and detoxification and all these things. And we definitely didn't have like a fear towards the sun. My mom, she's Italian. She has a great tan. She loves the sun. And she definitely encouraged us children to go outside, and she never gave us sunscreen or anything like that. And so we definitely had that, like, a good relationship with the sun, but it was never like a priority, I would say. More so like the nutrition that was the big priority. And so, in the past like 3-ish years, I really started diving deep into the research behind sunlight, because I think it's a factor that most people probably don't even think about, really. Especially in the health and wellness world, it's really diet and exercise. And once you have those 2 things, you're good. But I think there's so much more to it. One of those things, including sunlight and just light, your light environment in general. And it just has a dramatic effect on your health. And, I started going to the sunrise every morning, started to understand how my light environment impacts me, started changing my light environment for the better, and then started seeing these drastic effects just on my overall health. I was fortunately already in a healthy state, but I saw these just even greater health, which was great. And I fell in love with the research and the science behind it. And like you said, started sharing that on social media, and it's been really fruitful. It's been awesome.
It's so fun to watch because you're and I say this as such a compliment because I am the same, but you've got such a great nerdy way of bringing very interesting science and making it exciting. And I love it because I'm like, yes, my brain works very similarly, and your posts are so fun. And everyone has to go follow you on Instagram because you whiteboard out everything. You explain the studies.
Right behind me there. There's my whiteboard.
It's awesome. Well, you'll appreciate this. So about 20 years ago, I was in naturopathic medical school, and I was trying to tell my classmates at the time that I was certain that we photosynthesize. Mm-hmm. And we didn't have any mechanisms down at that point. But I was like, no, I'm pretty sure that in a roundabout way, maybe not directly, but in a roundabout way, we absolutely photosynthesize. And back then, what we were being taught was if you have multiple sclerosis or autoimmune disease, you should stay out of the sun because MS can be aggravated by heat. Vitamin D was just coming on the scene as something that we might want to pay attention to. And all of a sudden, my whole life fell into place. I moved from Southern California to Oregon when I was 13, and my life fell apart. My health fell apart. My mental health fell apart. It was a long haul. And I am now 52 years old, and I finally just moved myself back to the sun. I finally just was like, you know what? Screw it. I'm too old and I am leaving. And so I am back in the sun, and like it is, I mean, I can feel my old self coming through. And it's so exciting to see you break down the science, because you're definitely way ahead of the curve, and I keep up with quite a bit of it though. And I think in a roundabout way, we are very much photosynthesizing. I mean, it is driving our mitochondria, which is driving our life force. So
I think so. I have a very similar, like, short, really story here. When I was in high school, I think it was my junior bio class. I'm the student who asks the questions that the teacher doesn't like, because it's sort of just asking deeper questions. And I asked the question, like, I mean, trying to be a little funny maybe, but also like serious. I was like, we were learning about photosynthesis and the chemical pathways there, and I asked the question, like, can humans photosynthesize? And everyone starts like laughing, like, obviously not. I'm like, how do you know not obviously? Because coming with this perspective of like the sun is it's a vital energy force. I mean, it is what gives life to every single plant, every single organism, humans as well. And I asked the question, and it turns out there's a researcher, his name's Arturo Herrera out of Mexico, and he has a lab called the Human Photosynthesis Lab, where he studies this idea of quite literally human photosynthesis. And his hypothesis, I will say, it has not been experimentally proven. It's more so in the hypothesis stage at this point, but he does have some evidence to back it up. But essentially, we all have melanin in our skin, and melanin is a semiconductor. So it absorbs light, and then it can use that light to basically break bonds of molecules. And all the melanin in our body is hydrated. So it's always around. So water is always surrounded by melanin in our body. And the idea here is that basically exactly what happens in photosynthesis, light, when melanin absorbs light, it can break the water bond. So the H2O, it breaks the H2O into oxygen and hydrogen, leaving 4 free electrons left over, which those electrons can go down the electron transport chain in your mitochondria and then ultimately produce ATP. And so this hasn't been proven mechanistically or experimentally, but it's an interesting hypothesis, and I think there needs to be more work done on it, but it's quite literally human photosynthesis. And obviously we'll talk about some other more experimentally proven things here, but that's one thing I like to think about.
And it's not always directly the same mechanism as true photosynthesis, but in a roundabout way, it is. Yeah. It's charging our batteries. Yeah. Like it's and it's keeping us going. And I remember being in 8th grade and having a dermatologist tell me to stay out of the sun. I grew up in Southern California on the beach. I was like a little surfer girl, and she's like, you need to stay out of the sun and wear sunscreen. And I was like, are you? I literally remember looking at my mom like, is this chick insane? And then my entire life has been nothing but stay out of the sun. I am that generation where it was just, I'm old enough to remember when we loved the sun, and then we hated the sun for the majority of my life. And all I've watched is people get sicker and fatter and more metabolically compromised throughout the entirety of my life. And I'm just like, okay, humans are not doing so good. There's a piece missing here. There's several pieces missing. But I think, even if people just went out in the sun more often and did so safely and intelligently, there's ways to do this without burning the hell out of yourself. I think we would see rates of metabolic disease plummet. I mean, it's insane. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about the basics of this.
Yeah, for sure. So, metabolic disease is probably one of the biggest things. And, it ultimately comes down to your mitochondria, right? So your mitochondria are these little organelles inside of every single one of your cells, besides red blood cells, because they don't have mitochondria, but every single other one of your cells have thousands of mitochondria inside of one single cell. You have trillions of cells in your body. So you can just think you have so many mitochondria. And these mitochondria are basically these little organelles that basically are little batteries, right? So your mitochondria have an inner mitochondrial membrane, and across that membrane is a charge gradient. So you basically have this voltage across the membrane, and these electrons come down the electron transport chain to essentially produce, what we said, ATP, adenosine triphosphate, which is the energy currency of the cell. And the higher this charge gradient in the mitochondria, the more ATP that is going to be produce, and then the more energy that is available to the body and to our cells. And when we look at light, so there's some amazing research out of University College London, Dr. Glenn Jeffrey. He's done some great research on this, where we're looking at longer wavelengths of light. So the sunlight spectrum spans from UV all the way to far infrared. UV, short wavelength, red, infrared. Infrared is just beyond red, is long wavelength light. And these long wavelength light basically are able to increase this charge on our mitochondria, thereby increasing ATP production, thereby having more available energy in the cell, and also just healthier mitochondria in general. And when we look at every single disease, cardiovascular disease, cancer, you name it, diabetes, it all comes down to it's metabolic disease, right? And it comes down to your mitochondria. And if you have unhealthy mitochondria, unhealthy in the loose terms, mitochondria, then this is what creates disease. And there's a few different mechanisms here, right? We have so red and infrared light on your mitochondria. You have these protein complexes. One of the protein complexes is called cytochrome C oxidase. Cytochrome C oxidase is basically this chromophore. Chromophore is just something that absorbs light. Cytochrome C oxidase absorbs red and infrared light, releasing nitric oxide, allowing electrons and protons to funnel through, push protons against the gradient, have a higher charge on the mitochondria, producing more ATP. And that's one mechanism. There's also, the mitochondria is so awesome. You have the last protein complex is ATP synthase. It's this little motor, and quite literally a motor. At the end of it, it's this little rotor that spins really, really fast. And at every single spin, you have one ATP that's produced. And so this rotor also has water around it. And the water is viscous. So if we can reduce the viscosity of the water around the rotor can spin faster, right? Makes sense. You have lower viscosity. The rotor can spin faster, thus producing more ATP. And that's exactly what infrared light does. So infrared light can be absorbed by this water around ATP synthase, reducing the viscosity of the water, and then ultimately producing more ATP. Those are the two main sort of mechanisms at play here. Dr. Glenn Jeffrey, Bob Fosbury, Scott Zimmerman, and Dr. Roger Schwelt. There are these four researchers sort of in like different silos of the space. One is a quadruple board certified physician out of California. One is just, a fundamental wet lab researcher. One is an astrophysicist, and one is a lighting engineer. And they sort of come together. They're putting out a paper soon where they have a new sort of hypothesis of what's happening. And what it basically is that the infrared light sort of like acts as a lubricant in this electron transport chain of the mitochondria, simply allowing the electrons to funnel through faster. So it doesn't have anything to do with cytochrome C oxidase, doesn't have anything to do with the nanowatt around ATP synthase, simply allowing electrons to funnel through faster and thus increasing charge gradient, increasing ATP, having a healthier mitochondria in general. We want that charge, those electrons to flow properly. There's this concept of energy resistance. So Dr. Martin Picard out of Columbia University, he's published a great paper with his wife, Narosha, where it's called the energy resistance principle. If we have too much energy resistance in a system, if energy cannot flow properly, that's what is fundamentally at the root cause of every single disease. If energy resistance is too high, you have disease. If energy resistance is too low, you also have disease. So there's sort of this like Goldilocks zone of energy resistance and energy flow within the mitochondria. And these electrons are simply just energy that are flowing. And we want that flow to be in this Goldilocks zone. How do we do that? Well, I think light environment is one of the biggest things, allowing those electrons to flow at the right rate and basically lubricating the mitochondria. So this all goes back to, metabolism, right? There was a great paper published by Dr. Glenn Jeffrey where he basically shined red light on participants. He basically gave these participants a big gulp of glucose. So a big bottle of glucose. They drank the glucose. He shined red light on 4% of the total body surface area. So a very small portion of these people's backs. And he monitored their blood glucose over time. And we know that we don't want these big peaks in our blood glucose levels and these spikes in blood glucose. We want to sort of dampen those spikes. And what he showed is that compared to the control group, there was a control and an experimental group in the study. Compared to the control group, the people who got shined the red light on their backs had almost 30% reduction in total blood glucose levels, which is like huge. Right? I just spoke with Glenn Jeffrey recently, and he was describing some unpublished research that they're currently conducting with continuous glucose monitors, where all he's doing is putting back in near infrared light on someone's desk in their work environment. So putting a near infrared light bulb on the people's work environments, having a continuous glucose monitor to monitor their glucose over time, comparing it to controls. And what he's seeing is that there is a blunted blood glucose simply by changing the light. So food's the same, everything's the same. The light is the only thing that's changing, and we're having a reduced blood glucose, better metabolism. Your body's able to use the energy that it's consuming in a more efficient way. And I think that's, what is really key here. And the biggest thing is like I said, the food isn't changing, right? We think, and this isn't to say go eat junk food and just get the right light. You still want to eat healthy food, obviously.
Right.
But it's to say just the power of light that it has on our metabolism. And I think it's huge. I think Glenn Jeffrey also, before he did this paper with the participants were shining the red light on their backs, he first did it on bees because he didn't want to go straight into humans. So he took bees, he had 3 groups. He had a control group, he had a red light group, and then he had a blue light group. What he saw is that compared to the control group, the red light group had a blunted glucose, reduced blood glucose in the bees. When he looked at the blue light group, there was an increase in blood glucose from shining the blue light on these bees. And the question is why? Well, again, it comes down to the mitochondria. The mitochondria are also absorbing the blue light. That is essentially sort of bringing more energy resistance into the mitochondria. These electrons aren't able to flow properly. And now you have reduced ATP. You have more blood glucose circulating in the bloodstream. And he then, when he went on to go do this study in the humans, he saw it as unethical to shine the blue light on the humans. That's why he only shined the red light on the humans. And which is funny because we are surrounded by blue light 24/7 in our environment.
As I'm getting blasted by it right now.
Exactly. And so it's like, and the worst thing is like, all right, one, we're eating junk food, right? Which that's not helping our metabolism and our metabolic health. But then we're also eating this junk food under what I would just consider junk light. It's artificial light, which is void of any near infrared light, and it's abundant in those short wavelengths of blue light, which is essentially damaging our mitochondria, damaging our health, damaging our metabolic health in general. So light has a huge impact on metabolism, huge impact on your metabolic health. And I think if we change our lighting, we would drastically see. I mean, Glenn Jeffries is seeing this in his papers that he's publishing. We are seeing improvements in metabolic health drastically. So it's really, really interesting stuff.
Well, I think about all of the peptides and the GLP-1s and the hormone replacement, and I am not against any of them, and I take them all myself, but the sunlight comes first. I mean, I was in Oregon, like I said, for decades, and every single summer would blossom and bloom, and then every winter would go back into my hole. And it was fine. I was managing it. But at a certain age, right around late 40s, as perimenopause was hitting, I was realizing that I was chasing symptoms around that were probably just light deficiency symptoms, really. And so I started plotting my move. I really started playing. I started warning my family and everyone, like, I'm going. You just wait, but I'm going to Arizona. And got here, got my daughter moved out here. Like, she's a different human being completely, just in the few months that she's been here. It is so vastly different when you live in the sun and you can wake up in the morning and get that first early sun, which I want you to explain to them why that's so important, because that early morning sunlight is so rich with that red light, and it's like the juiciest sun. And then that late afternoon sun is so, I mean, midday sun's magical too, but like just making sure that I go out and get hit 3 times a day in direct sunlight is absolutely life-changing. And I think I don't understand how people live in darkness. I don't understand how, and the LED lights are not just junk, they're poison. LED is straight up poisoning us. It's very ironic. We moved here last November and we realized that a lot of the folks are staying inside all day. Like, we're always in our backyard hanging out, and it's a really quiet neighborhood with mostly elderly folks, and nobody goes outside. And then we realized that the house was full of LED lights. So my husband's an electrician, so we quickly remedied that situation. But I realized I had never lived in a house that was modern and had LED lighting. All of my lighting had always been incandescent. I about lost my mind when the Biden administration outlawed incandescent light bulbs. I was like, when are we bringing those back? But switched the whole house to incandescent, made sure all the LEDs stay off. They have tape on them, so nobody turns them on ever. And I mean, it is like an affront when one of us accidentally turns it on at night, the other one just loses it. Like, what are you doing? But it's the irony that these people move to the desert to get sun and then stay in their houses all day and then live under LED lights. I'm like, It's crazy. And they're poisoning themselves in their houses.
Yeah. The LEDs are really, really harmful. I'll go back to another study by Glenn Jeffrey, published in Nature, one of the most prestigious journals out there. Nature Scientific Reports. And what he did, he basically, so he went to a work environment, and he basically, he randomized participants in, he had a control group and an experimental group. In the experimental group, and these participants were working in a building that had no windows, only LED lighting. And when we look at an LED light spectrum, there's a huge spike in the blue. There's some green, some orange, some red, and then it stops at around 700 nanometers, which is when the visual spectrum sort of stops. And then beyond that is infrared, near infrared, and far infrared. And these LED lights have none of that, right? So he went into this built environment, no windows, just LED lighting. And basically all he did was he took a 60-watt incandescent light bulb, which if we look at the incandescent light bulb spectrum, it starts, actually pretty much beyond that blue. So you don't have very much blue in a standard incandescent light bulb. And it goes really high up all the way into the far infrared. So tons of long wavelength light. He took a 60-watt incandescent light bulb. He placed it on these participants' desks. And he didn't say like, oh, you need to stand in front of the light bulb, or you need to, be in front of the light bulb for a certain amount of time. They were working, these were architects. So they were sort of going around in this room that they had. And sometimes, they're at their desk. Sometimes they were over somewhere else in the room. And he put it on for 2 weeks. So 60-watt incandescent light bulb for 2 weeks. He tested their color contrast. So color contrast is essentially sort of this function to see visual function. So they test the visual function of these participants. And why visual function is so important is because not only our eyes, our retina, is the tissue in our body that has the most mitochondria. So our retina are very mitochondrial dense. The reason for that is because they need to function a lot, so they need a lot of energy, and so the mitochondria are providing that. So they're very mitochondrial dense. He was looking at the visual function of these participants, and he tested them before, then he tested them after the 2 weeks of putting the incandescent light bulb, and what he saw was a almost 30% improvement in these participants' visual function, simply by adding a 60-watt incandescent light bulb on their desk. There's nothing else. It was just 60-watt incandescent light bulb. Now, what's really interesting is that Glenn Jeffrey he published some research earlier where he shined a red light device, so simply just a 670 nanometer red light in participants' eyes, and he also saw an improvement in visual function. Now, keep in mind that's just a narrow band, single wavelength red light. That percentage of improvement was around, I want to say, 15%. Now, when he brought a more full spectrum, a more broad spectrum of long wavelength light, which included the 670 nanometers, but also included further near infrared wavelengths, he saw a greater improvement in that visual function. So I think what's really interesting here, and this, I also don't say this as a sort of like biohack, right? This is sort of just the baseline of where the human body should be and where our mitochondria should be living in. So this isn't like go shine red light on your body and like you're going to see these improvements. Well, you may see the improvements, but the reason you're seeing the improvements are because of the lack of long wavelength lights in your environment. So let's say we took one of our ancient ancestors who's outside in full spectrum sunlight 24/7, and we shine red light on their bodies, and we tested their, let's say, blood glucose, or we tested their visual function, or whatever it was. We probably wouldn't see an improvement simply because these people were already getting tons of long wavelength light, right? And so I think these improvements that we are seeing are simply a statement of how deprived of red and near infrared light we are in our built environment. And that's what the LED is, right? We are completely deprived of of these wavelengths. And it is fundamentally damaging our mitochondria. I mean, especially retinal health, right? People who are staring at screens all day, and also not even just screens, just in a normal built environment with standard LED light bulbs, our retina is being sort of bombarded with short wavelength blue light, not having that counterbalance of the long wavelength red and infrared. And that is damaging our cells. So if we shine blue light on cells in a petri dish, we see an increase in reactive oxygen species. Reactive oxygen species are these reactive molecules, these free radicals that basically cause damage if they're in excess in our body. They cause damage to our cells. And when we shine blue light, we have an increase in reactive oxygen species. And what's really interesting here as well is that when we shine red and infrared light, it creates and it produces antioxidants within the body, which then are able to combat those reactive oxygen species. So, it's really this balancing effect, because when we go outside in sunlight, there's tons of blue light in sunlight, right? It's not like sunlight is void of blue light, but sunlight has a ton of red and infrared light. So it's that balance that we want, and we're not getting that balance with an LED light bulb. So I think my personal belief is, I think, companies or businesses and enterprises are probably going to start being like sued, because people are going to start seeing like how damaging their health is from these LED and fluorescent light bulbs. And, once that starts happening, then obviously we're going to see changes and people aren't going to want to be sued anymore. That's sort of what happens. Is like, if you have a bad product, you're going to get sued. They're going to improve the product, hopefully. And I think that's probably what we're going to see. Hopefully we don't have to get to that point, right? Hopefully we can start changing our indoor light bulbs. But I think, it's definitely something that people, simply just aren't aware of. So I think just getting this out there is what's the biggest thing. And looking at the research. I mean, we have plenty of research to back it up. I honestly don't even think we need much more. I think really what we need is just to start changing our indoor light environment.
I agree. I think it would be great if the current administration would bring back incandescent bulbs and we could get them more readily, because you'll laugh when about a month before that went into effect, I literally bought thousands of dollars worth of incandescent bulbs. And when we moved from Oregon to Arizona, I had a trailer. We were hauling a small trailer behind us. And inside that trailer was my most prized possessions. Like, it was my most important things that I don't know. I was just having anxiety. I didn't want it in the pod that was being transported. I don't know. And in that trailer was that box of what was left of those incandescent light bulbs. And my daughter just recently, like 2 days ago, she's 26. She's a little bit older than you. She called me and she's like, "Mom, I need light bulbs for my closet. It's all LED. It's horrible. Like, can you have some, will you bring me some light bulbs?" And I was like, "Sure thing, honey." But in my head, I'm like, damn, we're getting down to the end of them. We're like at the, yeah, I know. And I know that there's alternatives out there, but it's just crazy. And it's crazy to me that I realize that people don't know this, but what is weirder to me, if I'm being honest with you, is how people just can't tell. Like, how do you not know? You feel so drastically different. When I'm under those lights, I feel like I'm dying. And when I'm inside all day, I feel like I'm dying. And in Oregon, it quite literally, there will be stretches of weeks on end where you don't know what time of day it is because it's so gray. You wake up to gray, you go to bed to gray. You don't want to get out of bed. You don't know if it's the afternoon or the evening. It is so gloomy and dreary. And like, I inherently know that is completely messed up, and that there's no version where I don't believe humans ever stayed in that. I believe humans were nomadic. Just like I don't believe that. I was talking to my husband today. He's like, there's no way that the natives stayed in this heat. They were nomadic. The second it got hot, they were probably up into Flagstaff and into the cooler climates. But we have somehow gotten ourselves as humans living in weird boxes under horrifically poisonous lights, staying inside all day. Nobody goes outside. Nobody exercises outside. My husband's a farmer, so he's outside all day and he's very healthy, extremely healthy. But it's just bizarre to me how people don't inherently instinctually realize it, that we have to have these conversations and these studies. I'm like, I don't even feel like we need the studies. Like, it's pretty obvious to me. You put a plant or an animal or anything inside of, let's just back up. Mitochondria are bacteria. Like, yes. That's the part that when I wrote a paper about this in undergrad, you'll be proud of me. I wrote a whole paper about how mitochondria were bacterium when I was in junior year. So, I've been on this for a while, and I took a lot of shit for that then too. But I inherently, if you want to kill bacteria, you put it in a dark space, and it will eventually die. Yeah. And that's what we're doing to our poor bodies. It just seems like it should be a little more instinctual to me that these lights I think the big thing though is that when people do transition to changing their lighting, they're going to see how much better they feel. And then there's no turning back. I mean, I know that's how it was for me. It sounds like that's how it was for you as well. It's like, once you actually see the change, and it's so simple, and just, changing the lighting. It's like, how much simpler can it get than that? And you're going to see drastic improvements in, your mood, your focus, your alertness, your energy. It's like all of it. It changes your life. Yes. Even just windows, even just making it a priority to have all the window coverings open during the day and having light come into your house, natural light, even if it's gloomy and dark where you live, having the natural light come in, that's huge. I lived in a lot of different locations in Oregon, and the places that had great windows, I was good. I could handle those winters. In the places where I didn't have good window light, I was depressed as hell all winter. So, there just comes a time when we're mammals. We're just fancy mammals with opposable thumbs. All mammals want to lay by the window. We need to start listening to our instincts on that.
Yeah, exactly. You can look at those time-lapse videos of the cats, and you can see the sun coming in through the windows, and the cats will move with the sun. It's like instinctively they want to feel that warmth of the sun. And, I think to your point of the windows, it is definitely very important, because not only is the type of light important that we're getting, but also we want this sort of change in lighting throughout the day, right? Mm-hmm. Obviously, when the sun is rising, it's a little dimmer in the environment, and then midday, obviously, it's very bright, and then goes down dim at night until it's darkness. And we want sort of that cyclical change in our lighting environment throughout the day for our circadian system, to telling our body what time of day it is, obviously. So that's another factor in these environments that don't even have windows, right? So one, they have LED lighting, which is damaging their mitochondria, and then they also don't have windows, which isn't having that circadian cue into the eye to tell your brain what time of day it is. So you sort of have a twofold problem there.
Yes, absolutely. And all that to say, we have to be smart about how we sun ourselves, and we have to build a little bit of a solar callus, and we have to be intelligent about it. But I have friends that are my age that are vehemently against the sun. They stay out of it at all costs because they don't want sunspots. They don't want, I just went to the dermatologist and had, I go in and get my little moles checked and cut off every so often. And every once in a while there's a basal cell carcinoma. And I'm like, whatever, I'm still not staying out of the sun. I'm not afraid of skin cancer. I know what the science says. And I also know that photo damage is real, of course. We don't want to just as we get older, we don't want to just be blasting our face. Our pores will enlarge, our skin will start to look haggard and aged, but there's an intelligent way to do it, to keep a little color in your skin and keep a little bit of that natural sunlight happening every day. It doesn't have to be excessive, but it does need to happen. And we've lost the plot. We have just completely, it's not lost on me that humans in general are so metabolically compromised and so sick and so upside down. And I'm just like, we're kind of all light deprived, guys. We're having a major light deficiency issue here. And people don't want to prioritize that because they can't. I don't know why. They don't think it's, I don't think the people who know. The people who spend a lot of time outside know. But the people who don't spend a lot of time outside, or maybe they're not athletic, or maybe they've never been athletic or done sports, they don't know. They just kind of, literally your generation, and my daughter's generation, I would say, is the first one with cell phones. You kids, a lot of you, maybe not where you grew up, but in Oregon, those kids were inside their entire lives. All day, forever. It's staring at a blue light screen. And we wonder why everyone's sick.
Yeah, and you wake up, the first thing that kids are doing is they're going right on their phone. And the first light that they're interacting with is that blue enriched phone light, right? And they're staying in bed for a while, scrolling on their phone until they're ready to get out of bed. And then they don't even get sunlight within probably a few hours of waking. And if they do, it's not very much, So I think it's it's definitely sad seeing my generation like that. But I think I've been seeing my generation waking up a little bit to it, which is good to see. I think they're sort of questioning things more, which is great. I think that's what we need to do, and that's how we sort of make change. So it's interesting to see where people are at with that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's why I wanted you to come on, because I'm like, this young man is smart, and people need to listen. This is for all my listeners are probably middle-aged women, but and men, but I hope that they have their kids listen to this, because again, however many people we need to bring the message so we can get it right. So let's talk about skin cancer. Let's talk about UV deprivation and skin cancer.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I think, to your point with the squamous cell and basal cell carcinoma. So when we look at the epidemiology, so epidemiology is just these large cohort observational studies. When we look at the observational studies on this, we do see an association where if we do increase sun exposure, we do increase the risks of getting these basal cell and squamous cell carcinomas. Now, these skin cancers, like you said, they're not that big of a deal. Like, most people are not dying from basal cell and squamous cell carcinoma. Now, that's not to say I want people to get that, right? Obviously, it'd be best if we don't. And I think there are other mitigations for that in terms of your diet, and in terms of circadian biology, our DNA repair mechanisms and our tumor suppressor genes in our body are all under circadian control. So if we have a misaligned circadian rhythm, well, then our tumor suppressor genes aren't going to be expressed at the right times. We aren't going to have proper repair. We aren't going to have proper DNA repair. And that's, when we're going to be seeing these increased rates of these skin cancers. But that's to say, we do see an association with this. And that is all, I do want to also point out that these large observational studies, they are looking at quote unquote healthy people, but a healthy person in today's society isn't, truly healthy. So that's just, one point to put there. When we look at the skin cancers that are killing people to a degree, or that are more dangerous, that have a higher mortality rate, and that is melanoma. So melanoma is a skin cancer that we do not want, right? That people are dying from melanoma. And so when we look at the melanoma literature with sunlight and melanoma mortality, there's actually an inverse relationship. So as we increase chronic sun exposure, so chronic sun exposure is simply regular sun exposure. So going out every single day, getting sun exposure every single day. As we increase chronic sun exposure, we reduce the risk of melanoma mortality. And every single study says this, right? There's not a single study that says the opposite. Now, what we do see that increases melanoma mortality is sunburning. So if we sunburn, we do increase the risk of melanoma mortality. However, so that's to say, just don't sunburn, right? And that's sensible. If you look at, I watch my dog. I go out and sunbathe, and my dog comes out with me. And then when he's done and when he's hot, he'll go in the shade. Yes. And so we just need to be the same,
Yes,
we need to be in tune with our body, knowing, I don't want to burn, and that doesn't feel good. Like burning doesn't feel good. So obviously, it's not something that we want. So we definitely want to avoid burning at all costs. Now, that's to say, and this is an anecdote, but also we have some papers on this, and most dermatologists will acknowledge this, and that is that a lot of melanoma cases are actually in parts of the body that don't even receive sun exposure. So think like the waist area, think like the palms of your hands, the bottom of your feet. Like people are getting melanoma in areas that don't even get any sun exposure, which is just interesting nonetheless. And so, but that sort of goes to the point is like, as we increase regular sun exposure, we're reducing melanoma mortality. So we actually, to protect us from melanoma mortality, we actually want more sun exposure, which is really the interesting thing here. And I think people don't think about that because the dermatology literature is just saying, avoid the sun, put sunscreen on, seek the shade, don't go out in the sun. And I posted some stuff on social media, and there's some people that would be like, oh, dermatologists don't say that. It's like, I don't know what dermatologist you're listening to, but if that's true, I wish dermatologists don't say that. But that's sort of what they're saying. And if you look at the sort of the American, the American Dermatology Association, that's, if you go on their website and look at what their stance is on sun exposure, it is to avoid the sun as much as you can. Now, that's not to say all dermatologists have this stance. So there's a dermatologist by the name of Dr. Richard Weller. He's a dermatologist, he's a medical doctor, but also a researcher. He's published some really awesome papers in this space. And there's sort of three papers that I like to highlight that I think are pretty profound. The first one was a paper out of Sweden. So what they did was that they took again a cohort epidemiological observational study. They took 30,000 Swedish women. They essentially gauged their average amount of sun exposure through questionnaires. They saw that, and then they tracked these women for 20 years. So 20 years, and they looked at their outcomes. Did these people die? Basically was the question. And all causes. So what was their death from cardiovascular disease, other types of cancers, just all cause mortality. They tracked these women for 20 years. And what they saw at the end of it was that the women that got the most amount of sun exposure had the lowest mortality rate. So they were dying the least. They had a longer lifespan compared to the woman that got the least amount of sun exposure. What's really interesting here is that it was dose dependent. What that means is that as they increased sun exposure, as you went from the lowest sun exposure to the medium sun exposure to the highest sun exposure, you had a continuous reduction in mortality rates. Now, when we look at, this is obviously observational, so we can't prove causation. Correlation doesn't equal causation, but we also do have criteria. We have the Bradford-Here criteria that tell us certain criteria that if we check off the box, we can be more certain that there may be a causal thing at play here. And that's exactly what we see. We see this dose response curve, which is very important for causality. Now, they also, something that was really interesting in this paper was they also looked at these women's smoking habits. And what they saw was that the women who got the most amount of sun exposure and smoked had the same mortality as women who got the least amount of sun exposure and did not smoke, basically putting smoking at pretty much the same playing field as sun exposure. And, that's not to say to go smoke. Obviously, the best thing to do would get the most amount of sun exposure and don't smoke. That would give you the highest reduction in mortality. But it's to show you the impact that this has, right? Now that was a really great observational study. Dr. Richard Weller took this and he took UK Biobank data, 400,000 participants, so a much larger sample size. He took 400,000 participants. He looked at how much sun exposure they were getting via surveys, but also via satellite imaging of how much UV was in their area, how much UV was in their area. And what he saw was the exact same thing. Dose response curve, the more sun exposure people got, the lower their mortality was. Now, what's really the paper that I'm really excited about, which is not published yet, but it's a preprint. So preprint, basically, these researchers can put a paper on a preprint server for the public to see, and it's not published yet, so it's not under peer review. But most of the time, it's pretty much the same thing as what's in the preprint. So what they did was they basically created what they call the sunbeam score. So they categorized these people via a few different criteria. One was questionnaires to gauge how much sun exposure they got. One was satellite images to see how much sun exposure was, how much UV was in a certain area where they lived. And then the other one was vitamin D status. They took all of these three proxies for sun exposure, and then they made it the sunbeam score. They categorized people into low UV, medium UV, high UV, and they did the same thing. They looked at cardiovascular death. They looked at cancer death, non-skin cancer death. And then they also looked at skin cancer death as well, and all-cause mortality. And what he saw was that as you increase sun exposure, again, dose-dependently, you have a reduction in cardiovascular disease, you have a reduction in non-skin cancers, and you have a reduction in all-cause mortality. Now, he went on to do something really interesting, and that was he looked at the risk-benefit ratio. So as I mentioned in the very beginning, you do have this potential risk of increased squamous cell, increased basal cell carcinomas with more sun exposure. But then, as we're also seeing, we're having a reduction in cardiovascular disease, a reduction in non-skin cancers, the two things that are burdening this country the most. It's cardiovascular disease and non-skin cancers. Now, what he found was that basically dialing down all the numbers into one sort of nice small ratio. If he did some statistical analysis and he looked at, if we put all the people who were in the high UV category, so the people who were getting the most amount of sun exposure, and let's say we put them in the low UV category, so essentially like forcing them to not get sun exposure, forcing them to be inside and not getting that sun exposure. If we put them in the low UV category, what are the outcomes we would have seen? And then he also did vice versa, the same thing. If we put all the people in the low UV category and put them in the high UV category, so basically forcing them to get more sun exposure, what are the outcomes we're going to see? And what he saw was this, that if we were to put everybody in the high UV category and we put them into the low UV category, so we made them get less sun exposure, for every one life that we would save from a skin cancer death, because we would save one life from a skin cancer death by doing that, by reducing sun exposure, we would lose 75 lives from cardiovascular disease and non-skin cancers.
Wow.
And then the same thing vice versa. We would gain those 75 lives back if we put everyone in the high UV category.
Wow.
And that's bringing the numbers down just to one small ratio. But he has all the numbers there. I think it was like 4,000 lives you save if in this cohort of people, if you put them in the high UV category. And so that sort of just tells us the risk-benefit ratio. Without a doubt, there is a greater benefit than there is a risk to sun exposure. And I think that's the thing that dermatologists aren't fully understanding, because at the end of the day, dermatologists are medical doctors. They were trained in 4 years of medical school as the same any other specialty, and they should not only be looking at skin cancers. Like, I believe they should also be looking at non-skin cancers, and they should be looking at cardiovascular disease. Like if you first do no harm, right? So see what is the risk benefit ratio of what you are telling people, right? And if what you're telling people is if there's a greater risk to it, well, then we don't want to tell people that. We want to tell people what has a greater benefit. And what has a greater benefit, without a doubt, is to get more, again, regular sun exposure. We don't want to burn, but we want that regular sun exposure to reduce these cardiovascular disease, reduce non-skin cancers. Again, the things that are burdening this country the most. And I think what's just, profound with this is that, there's a statistic that 93% of an American's day is spent indoors, which is insane, which 93% of the day not getting the potential to get direct sun exposure. And that's what we need, right? We need this direct sun exposure. One of the reasons why we see this reduction in cardiovascular disease is because, again, by Richard Weller, him and his team have done amazing research around nitric oxide. So this UV light, specifically UVA, it's UVA and UVB, but his research has been mainly on UVA because he was trying to see if there's a vitamin D independent pathway here. So this doesn't require vitamin D at all. So if he shines UVA on participants, what he sees is that nitric oxide in the blood increases. Now, why is this? Well, in our skin, in our dermis of the skin, we have nitric oxide stores. So our skin stores nitric oxide. And when UVA light or UV light in general is shined on our skin, these nitric oxide molecules get mobilized and they are able to now go into the bloodstream, able to vasodilate our blood vessels. So open up the blood vessels. If we can vasodilate the blood vessels, we can reduce blood pressure. If we can reduce blood pressure, we can reduce cardiovascular disease. And that's exactly what he's seeing. He is quite literally seeing if we can shine, he has a clinical randomized placebo-controlled trials in humans where he shines UVA light on participants. He measured blood nitric oxide levels. Blood nitric oxide levels increase. He measures blood pressure drops. And then when we look at the observational studies, we have reduction in cardiovascular disease, which is amazing, right? People are taking statins or people are taking blood pressure lowering medications all the time when you can simply, I'm not saying get off your medication right away. I mean, obviously talk with your doctor. I'm not a medical doctor, but we're seeing this reduction in blood pressure simply by getting UV light, simply by getting sunlight, which is like amazing, right? And that's what dermatologists should be looking at. It's like, what is killing people the most? Cardiovascular disease. It's not these skin cancers.
Well, the doctors generally are in their silos. And so if it's outside of their silo, it's not a concern, right? And I get it, but no, I'm with you 100%. My husband, it's so funny. When I met him, he had high blood pressure and I was like, oh, I can fix that. That's no big deal. And he's like, no, I've had it my whole life. I even had it when I was a teenager. And I was like, I think he just had anger problems as a teenager. But he's like, no, my dad, my mom, cardiovascular disease all the way around. And I was like, I can fix that. And lo and behold, little magnesium, adequate sunlight, no high blood pressure. Everything's, we feel it on our mood, right? We feel the impact on our mood. We get improved muscle mass when we get adequate sunlight. We get improved hormonal balance when we get adequate sunlight. We get our nitric oxide, as you said, which is lovely and wonderful for our cardiovascular system. It's kind of a no-brainer. But you hear the messaging. One of the things that I want you to hit on, so I don't forget while I'm thinking about it, because you did mention this in one of your reels. I was at a longevity mastermind recently, and one of the doctors got up there and she said, stay out of the sun. And I was like, what? We're at a longevity conference, woman. Are you kidding me? Anyway, she said, stay out of the sun. It literally obliterates your DNA. And I was like, oh my God, like this has to stop. But you posted a reel recently on mechanism here and how we end up, well, this is why we're addicted to the sun. So talk about that.
Yeah, exactly. So we're basically designed to be addicted to the sun. So when sunlight, UV light hits the skin, essentially what happens is we produce this molecule, it's this pro-hormone called pro-opiomelanocortin. So it's this big peptide that gets cleaved into smaller peptides. And the way this happens is yes. So when UV light hits the skin, it does break DNA. So DNA gets broken. And via that broken DNA, our body produces P53. P53 is a tumor suppressor gene. So when our DNA gets broken, again, if our circadian rhythm is in line properly, which is a big player here, then P53 is going to be produced at the right times and the right ratios. P53 is going to be produced, which is a tumor suppressor gene, which then will also help alleviate that broken DNA, but it also has other things that it does. So P53, it will bind to our DNA to produce this pro-hormone, this pro-opiomelanocortin, POMC for short. And then POMC, again, gets cleaved. So our body basically cuts POMC up at specific areas. It gets cleaved into other peptides. And one of the peptides is beta endorphin. And beta endorphin is a endogenous opioid. So our body produces opioids. It's this feel-good molecule that can have some interesting local effects at the skin, but it can also affect our brain and our hypothalamus and our pituitary gland and so forth, and that access right there, which then increases this sort of this feel good feeling that we get from sun exposure. And this goes to the point of our body. So if we want to think about vitamin D, because I think it's just easy to understand here, our body does need certain levels of vitamin D, obviously. And so our body has been designed to seek the sun and be addicted to the sun so that we don't have too low levels of vitamin D. And what's really interesting here is that beta endorphin is 20 times stronger than morphine, which is crazy, right? 20 times stronger than morphine. And another really interesting fact, again, remember this all started with broken DNA.
Yes.
Beta endorphin can also help alleviate broken DNA. So it actually repairs DNA itself.
Yes.
So not only is it having this good feel good opioid effect on our body, but it's also going back into that loop to help that broken DNA and to repair that DNA. So you're having this system that is basically fixing itself. So when dermatologists or when anyone says, oh, UV light, it just breaks DNA and damages DNA and leads to mutations and leads to cancer, that's not the full story, right? There's so much more. It's way more complex than that. And we have these sort of feedback loops to help prevent that if we give our body the proper things, if we align our body's circadian rhythm with the light dark cycle of the earth, then we will be able to sort of prevent any excess DNA damage that may occur.
Yes.
And that sort of goes to my point of like, all right, we are seeing these increases of basal cell and squamous cell carcinoma, but again, in a population that is circadian disrupted, in a population that is eating not clean food, in a population that is just not healthy, even though in the literature they'll say healthy participants. All that means is like they don't have cardiovascular disease yet.
Right.
They don't have
they don't have diabetes yet.
Yeah, exactly. So that's sort of the sunlight addiction story there.
I love it. No, when that reel came up, I was like, yes, vindication. She said this to a room full of elderly folks. And I was like, what on earth? Look around the room. The most vital health. I'm a naturopathic physician. I look at people's vitality. If they are beaming sunlight out of their bodies, I know they're healthy. And you look at the people who have a base level tan, significantly better muscle mass generally. They're just, I could be so lucky to get old and wrinkly and from the sun. Someone said the other day, they're like, you're just going to end up like with those old tan ladies, like with, leather skin. I was like, I wish I could be so lucky. I hope I live that long. And no, I don't want leathery skin, but you see these old gals out there puffing on cigarettes, nothing kills them, but they're tan as heck. And I'm not saying get that tan, but there's something there, there's something there. And then you go to Europe and you go to Italy and you see these elderly women in Croatia and they're very old and they're smoking cigarettes, they're walking miles and they're all tan. And I'm like, They're drinking wine and having fun.
Yeah. So, and I think that's one of the big things with like the blue zones, right? These areas of the earth where people are living past 100 years old, these centenarians. I mean, the one thing I think they all pretty much have in common is they're outside, right? And they're getting sun exposure. And of course, community. I think that's probably the number one thing. But they're all also getting sun exposure, which is huge. It's huge.
And Whole Foods and
exactly.
I read somewhere that there's a lot of uphill walking, which I think is interesting because I'm a big fan of stairs. I think stairs or hills, sunlight. There's a few basics that I try to get in my life regularly because I feel like they're going to add up. It's going to someday, if I'm still alive, I'll be vindicated on all of it. Speaking of living a long time, obviously stress reduction is a huge part of that. And I think the sun has a powerful impact on people's stress levels. And I was wondering if you knew the mechanisms of that. Cortisol. Yeah.
So when we have what's called the cortisol awakening response curve. So in the morning, cortisol is really high. So people think of cortisol as this, stress hormone, which, cortisol is a glucocorticoid. So it actually helps our body sort of mobilize glucose around the body and bring glucose to certain areas where needed. And cortisol is not, I hate to frame cortisol as just this stress hormone. Now, when we are stressed, this is when our body typically needs more glucose. So if we're running away from like a bear for a long time in our evolutionary past, right? Our body is stressed and it's in a very stressed state, but it's also running. It needs glucose to go to the muscles. So that's when cortisol will kick in allow glucose to get to the muscles. So cortisol is glucocorticoid. Now, in the morning, cortisol is actually really high. So we have this huge spike in cortisol in the morning, and then throughout the day, cortisol should go lower and lower, lower until nighttime when cortisol is pretty much, there's no cortisol left. And then we have melatonin that increases, allowing us to fall asleep. Now, the way we spike that cortisol more is to get morning sunlight. So if we can get morning sunlight into the eyes, it has an effect on our hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, our HPA axis, and that is allowing our body to produce more cortisol in the morning, having a higher spike. Now, if we have a higher spike, typically what that means is that we have a better sort of cortisol response throughout the day. And this will also help us with those daily stressors. So, if we do get, if we do have this sort of stressful event during the day, cortisol will typically spike. Now, if we get more cortisol in the morning, if we have a higher peak cortisol in the morning, that spike in cortisol from a stressful event later in the day will not be as high. So our body's able to sort of alleviate that cortisol release from a stressful event if we're having a proper cortisol awakening response in the morning. So again, this ties back into getting that morning light. So the ideal morning light is to see sunrise.
Yes. So
seeing that contrast in the sky, and then if you can't see sunrise, or if you don't want to wake up that early, although I encourage everyone to wake up that early, my recommendation is within the first hour of waking up, get outside, get morning light into the eyes. Even if it's cloudy, you can measure what's called lux, which is the brightness of light. In an indoor environment, you'd be lucky if you have 1,000 lux. Typical indoor environments around 500 lux. You'll be lucky if you have 1,000. If you go outside and test the lux on a bright sunny day, no clouds, it can be up to 200,000 lux. So much greater than indoors. Even on a cloudy day, you're at minimum 10,000 lux. So it's 10,000 lux and above on a cloudy, overcast day versus maximum of 1,000 lux indoors. So no matter what, being outdoors, even on a cloudy day, you're going to get that brightness, which then stimulates your intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells, which have melanopsin in them, and you have this whole pathway in your brain that produces cortisol, and basically controls every single one of your cells. Your circadian rhythm controls every single one of your cells, every single one of your organs, and then your organs itself have peripheral clocks and peripheral circadian clocks, and which then feed back into the central clock. And so, I think that's sort of a really easy sort of step for people to take is, right upon waking, go outside, get sunlight into the eyes, face east if you can. Even being under shade is like fine. If you have to be under a tree or whatever it is, like just being outdoors in that bright environment, it's way brighter outdoors than it is indoors, allowing you to have a healthier cortisol awakening response, allowing you to have a better cortisol sort of stress reactions throughout the day.
I love it. That's it. I will say, because I am an avid go outside in the morning girl, it sucks a lot less living in a warm environment because I would go outside in Oregon. The rain is blowing sideways. It is cold as heck. I'm out there with the dogs. The dogs are in their coats and I'm like, I'm doing my sunlight, but it was miserable. And now I wake up and I go sit out by my pool and drink coffee and it's lovely.
For people who are up north, I would encourage them to embrace the cold. Because so light is what's called a Zeitgeber. It's a timekeeper. It's the master timekeeper for our circadian clock. It's light, but other things also feed into that circadian clock and affect our circadian rhythm. Those things are food. So when we eat, this is why we don't want to eat late into the night. Other things are exercise. So exercise affects our circadian clock and what time you're exercising and things like this. But another thing is also cold. So there's some really interesting research around this where cold exposure can also play a role, and also that seasonality, right? That seasonality, that the temperature also tells our brain basically what time of day it is, and also what time of season it is, which is something as humans in our modern environment, we're always trying to seek the most comfortable environment we can, but we really want to be seeking that discomfort. If it's hot outside, embrace the heat. If it's cold outside, embrace the cold, and I think that will, that's not to say be outside in the freezing cold all day, right?
No, of course. But you got to, your tolerance to temperature matters a lot.
Exactly, for sure.
To your vitality. I'll take the heat though, man. Yesterday it was so hot out and I was like, I had no idea what a desert girl I was. Just cook me. It feels great. You'll love this. So I moved my daughter at the end of February to Arizona, and she was having a rough winter. It was just, she looked like she was on death's door. She was just pale and not feeling well and had just gone through a bad breakup. And we had to get her little dogs on the plane. She got a little Havanese and a little black Skipper Key pug mix. He's the funniest little thing. And we had to get them on the plane and get them to Arizona. So it was this whole big orchestration. We had to get the pod packed and the whole thing. So anyway, we get off the plane, we get her into her new house. The little black dog, we can't find him. He runs out in the backyard. We can't find him. We're like, where's Buddha? And we look over and there's this big white wall and he's leaning up against the wall with the full sunlight on him. And he's just sitting there like he was just photosynthesized. He was just taking it in. And I went over to pet him and he was so hot because he's jet black. He was so hot and he was just like, he was so happy. And then in the house, he does the same thing. He just lays at whatever window he can. And he just sits there and gets himself super hot and toasty. So he was in on it. They're happier. All my pets are so much happier here. Just getting
the animals know. Yep.
They know what's up. Speaking of cortisol, though, you said something on one of your reels, and I was so excited to hear you say it because I do the same thing. So share about that, which I also thought was very cool that your professor was having you guys test your cortisol. So share that little story about your cortisol testing.
Yeah, this is cool. So I was this past semester, I was in a comparative neuroendocrinology class. It was one of my bio electives this past semester. And one of our labs, we basically tested cortisol. So what we did was we have lab once a week. So on 1 week, we basically tested we did a baseline test of our cortisol levels. So what that entails is basically you have this little sponge that you put in your mouth. You chew the sponge. It's kind of gross. And you get the sponge really soaked up. You put it back in this little test tube. And then we send it off to get the cortisol levels tested. And then the following week, at the same time, which is important because cortisol, again, has a circadian rhythm. So it fluctuates throughout the day. So when you are testing cortisol, you want to test the cortisol at the same time of the day. So we tested our cortisol the next week, same day, same time. Instead of just testing the cortisol, what we did before the cortisol test was we gave a presentation. So we presented on a study having to do in some relationship to glucocorticoids and cortisol. And we presented that study in front of our classmates, as well as the professor who was in the back of the room grading us. And after that presentation, we went, everyone did this individual, or it was actually in pairs. So 2 people were presenting. And then we test our cortisol levels 10 minutes after the presentation. And then when we got our cortisol levels back, and what we saw for the most part, on average, there was, I don't remember the exact number, but I think it was around a 30% increase in cortisol levels after giving the presentation, and that was on average. Obviously, when we're dealing with science and studies, we look at averages, but obviously individuals fluctuate. And so I looked at my individual cortisol levels, and I think it changed by 0.011 increase, which is basically nothing. In terms the unit of cortisol. So the percent increase was even smaller. So my percentage cortisol barely changed. And I sort of, I made a video on this and talked about sort of the reasons why I think. And, I think it's one of the big ones, like what I just said is probably, I get that morning sunlight in the morning. I'm up not every morning, but as many mornings as I can, I go see the sunrise. I go to our track field, go to the top of the bleachers, have a nice view of the horizon, watch the sunrise. Nobody's awake at that time. Although I've gotten some of my friends out there with me. So I think
that's awesome.
There's a small group of us. It's typically on average three people. So we're out there getting our morning sunlight, getting that healthy cortisol awakening response curve. But then also other things. It's breath work helps a lot. And all these other things that really help with just your stress levels. Before I did that presentation, I did what's called the physiological sigh. So it's a deep inhale in, followed by another sort of squeeze in that inhale as much more as you can get in, and then a very soft, slow exhale out, lowering your heart rate, de-stressing you in that scenario. So yeah, I think it's there's some interesting ways to sort of hack that system there.
I love it. When you also said that you were excited, you don't You don't have, it's not nervousness, it's excitement. And that's something that I always do. Like if I'm nervous about something, I'm just running around going, I'm excited. Like SpongeBob, when he runs around, he's like, I'm ready.
Yeah. Exactly.
That's what goes through my head.
I love that. Yeah. I mean, that's a huge thing. It's like our belief system drives so much of our biology. There's a great book called The Biology of Belief. And we have like some awesome studies on this. I mean, and you just think about the placebo effect, right? The placebo effect is real. And why is the placebo effect real? Well, it's because we tell ourselves we're getting an intervention or whatever, and we're getting something that's helping us. And then the nothingness turns out to help us. That's only because we're believing it's helping us. And so, it sort of goes back to that. It's like, yeah, don't tell yourself you're nervous for something. Like tell yourself you're excited, tell yourself you're ready for it. And you'll be ready for it.
Yeah, it's the same physiologic response. You just reframe it, so it's very manageable. Well, I told you before we started, I could talk to you all day. So we're going to have you come back for a part 2. I love what you're doing. I love your work. I think you might take Huberman's throne one of these days. So I look forward to seeing that. Yeah. And I just keep doing what you're doing because it's great. And it's awesome. I'm really proud to see young people taking the reins, and it gives me hope in humanity. So thanks for coming on the show today. Oh, and tell everyone where to find you. Your wonderful, wonderful platforms.
I appreciate it. Yeah, it's Jonathan Jarecki, JONATHAN JARECKI on Instagram. I'm on X as well. And then I also have a YouTube where I have a podcast myself, and then I post some more long format videos because science can obviously be very nuanced. I can only say so much in a 60-second Instagram reel, but I've been doing some whiteboard videos where I go up to 3 minutes, but even that, there's so much more nuance to that. So I have my YouTube channel, which is just my podcast name, called The Signal with Jonathan Jarecki, which people can find that way as well.
Awesome. Well, we'll put all the links in the show notes, and go listen to the podcast, you guys. He's doing wonderful work out there. So thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, Dr. Tina.
Yeah. Thanks for listening to the Dr. Tina Show. This is a Wellness Loud production produced by Drake Peterson. Theme song is by John the Guilt. You can watch the full video version of this podcast inside the Spotify app or on YouTube. As always, you can email the podcast at podcast@drtyna.com. That's DRTYNA. And if you like this episode, please rate, review, and subscribe on your favorite podcast app. You can also find all of my offerings on my website at drtyna.com. For more shows by my team, go to wellnessloud.com. See you next time, and thanks for listening. This podcast is for general informational purposes only. It does not constitute the practices of medicine, nursing, or other professional healthcare services, including the giving of medical advice. I am a doctor, but I am not your doctor. No doctor-patient relationship is formed. The use of this information and the materials linked to this podcast is at the user's own risk. The content on this podcast is intended not to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Users should not disregard or delay in obtaining medical advice from any medical condition they have, and they should seek the assistance of their healthcare professionals for any such conditions.